Good evening. I'm Rabbi Michal Springer, the director of the Center for Pastoral Education here at JTS, and it is wonderful to be with all of you and to have such a beautiful evening ahead of us. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that people in New York have died today, and it affects all of us. One of the themes of Rabbi Levy, and we're going to have the pleasure of hearing her speak, is the interconnectedness of all. And so I can't launch us into an evening which is promising to be a very rich and powerful evening without acknowledging that we have broken hearts and broken families and people suffering and fighting for their lives. And I pray that everyone will receive solace and that people who are struggling right now with their injuries are able to experience a full recovery. So, with that heaviness, and with an awareness that we are here to talk about matters of life and the heart and living meaningfully, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Jewish Theological Seminary for the Jack and Louis Rudin Lecture. Some of you may be here for the first time, and we're particularly happy to have you with us. I'm also delighted to welcome all of our live stream viewers. It's wonderful that we're able to share tonight's program with you electronically. And we're pleased and excited that Congregation Agudat Achim of Schenectady, New York has partnered with JTS by holding a public screening of tonight's program. And so I would like to send a special welcome to all of you in Schenectady. At this time, please allow me to remind you, for those of you who are in the room, to take a moment to silence your cell phones. You already did that? Okay, thank you. Makes a difference. The Jack and Louis Rudin Lectures at JTS provide the opportunity for eminent academics, religious leaders, intellectuals, and public figures to discuss topics of interest with the JTS community and the public at large. We would like to express our thanks to the Rudin family for sponsoring the Rudin Lectures series, and to Alice Eaton, Program Director of the Rudin Foundation, for her involvement with the series. And we're very pleased that John Lewin, a trustee of the Rudin Foundation, and Donna Garber, a foundation administrator, who are joining us tonight. Thank you. The Center for Pastoral Education is co-hosting tonight's event, co-sponsoring, and we would have loved to have done this just based alone on the work that Rabbi Levy has done. But it turns out that our connection to this project is deeply personal, and I was not aware of this when we first pulled the evening together, which I'm so indebted to community engagement for making this suggestion. It turns out that I have known, you will hear soon from Rabbi Levy that there's a very special man who is a big part of the narrative of this book, Rabbi Robert Marcus, and he has two daughters who are here with us this evening with their families. One of them is Tamara Green, with whom I had the pleasure of going to synagogue for many years at Anshe Chesed, and the other is Roberta Leiner. And I have to say that the Center for Pastoral Education would not exist if it were not for Roberta Leiner. Roberta and I began connecting before I came to JTS, when I ran a residency in clinical pastoral education, and Roberta was the visionary who understood that social service agencies needed to expand their repertoire to include spiritual care. At the time, she was the director of the Caring Commission at UJA Federation of New York. So Roberta and I began a conversation back in 1999, which I think was right after you moved to New York. Shortly after, right? What did I say? Did I get it wrong? So in 2000. So it was 2000 that Roberta came. And when I wanted to create the Center for Pastoral Education here at JTS, the first person I went to speak with was Roberta Leiner. And I wanted to know if she would help us launch a program in partnership with UJA Federation, placing students at the agencies that are affiliated with UJA Federation. And her immediate response was, yes, we are there, we are with you. And so I have an endless debt of gratitude to Roberta for her vision and her willingness to help us create what we've been able to do here at JTS. So it is now my great pleasure to welcome and introduce tonight's speaker, Rabbi Naomi Levy. She will be speaking about her new book, Einstein and the Rabbi, Searching for the Soul. Rabbi Levy is also the author of the national bestseller, To Begin Again, as well as Talking to God and Hope Will Find You. She is the founder and leader of Neshuva, a groundbreaking Jewish spiritual outreach movement based in Los Angeles. She was named one of the top 50 rabbis in America by Newsweek and has appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show, the Today Show, and NPR. Rabbi Levy was in the first class of women to enter the Jewish Theological Seminary's rabbinical school and was ordained in 1989. She was the first woman in the conservative movement to head a congregation on the West Coast. Our program tonight will proceed as follows. First, Rabbi Levy will speak about her wonderful, insightful new book. Then I will have the privilege of engaging Rabbi Levy in conversation about the book, and following that, we will have an opportunity for questions from the audience. At the end of the program, Rabbi Levy has graciously agreed to be available to sign copies of her book, which will be on sale right over there. I'm now very pleased to invite Rabbi Naomi Levy to the podium for what I know will be a most illuminating presentation.
Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? It's a joy and an honor to be able to speak with you here where I was ordained. Actually, our aunt, my sister's here tonight as well, and our aunt Leah was a survivor, and after the war, they wanted to know if she had any relatives in America at all. And she kept saying, I know I have some relatives in a place called Shinichtach, and nobody knew what it was, and nobody knew how to help her. Schenectady, how do you pronounce that place? Where to begin? My colleague, Rabbi Elie Levy, wrote a beautiful thing that he sent to me this morning. And well, first I just want to thank Dr. Eisen and Tom and Rabbi Springer for this evening, and all of you for coming. About Halloween, partially about the yahrzeit of his beloved family members who perished in the Shoah. But he spoke about Halloween briefly. Honestly, I don't even know a thing about what Halloween is all about. But he said something about how people believe it's some kind of window that opens between the living and the deceased souls, something like that. And I'm one of those people who believes that window is open every day. And the tragedy of life is that we can't see that and we can't feel that. When people ask me how it was that I knew I was going to be a rabbi from the time I was 4 years old, I knew I was going to be a rabbi from the time I was 4 years old. And they always ask the same question: was your father a rabbi? And I always answer the same way. I say, no, my father was in the shmata business, but he was my rabbi. And from the youngest age, he taught me. He taught me Torah, he taught me commentaries. He'd schlep me to shul with him. And And I was just smitten with Yiddishkeit, and I knew somehow I was going to be a rabbi. And when I was 15 years old, our parents were walking down the street in Brooklyn, and a mugger approached them at gunpoint, and he shot my father. And my father died. And as you can imagine, so many things died all at once. Myself, the woman my mother was, every holiday, prayer. It's okay. And God, I didn't know what God meant anymore. And I walked around very lost and very angry for many years, for a number of years. And then when I was in college, I was just minding my own business, walking in campus, and I had the unmistakable feeling that I sensed my father's soul with me. And at first I just thought I could shake it off. That's weird. But I couldn't shake it off. I really sensed the presence of my father beside me. And I started to worry that maybe I was losing my mind. So I actually sat down with my mentor, who was a literature professor of mine, and I told him what was going on, and I said, I think I might need to be medicated. And he said to me, Naomi, you come from a tradition of the great prophets, of Abraham and Deborah and Samuel. They were all touched by a presence. Trust me, what you're experiencing is a gift. It's a gift. You're meeting your soul, and you're meeting your father's soul too. And then we spent this bitter cold afternoon up in Ithaca, New York, talking about Wuthering Heights and the writings of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and our ability to experience things that we usually push away, usually push aside. And many, many years later, as a rabbi, I found myself again being pulled or tugged, connected to the soul of someone I'd never even known or met or didn't know anything about. But the storyline of his life and the storyline that pulled me, I can't explain it. I don't know why it happened, but I definitely felt that I was being led into a story that I hadn't intended to enter. So, if you'll permit me, I'm just going to read to you a little bit, if it's okay, and then we'll talk. Or I'm from Brooklyn, so we'll talk. Okay? Say okay. So, I was wanting to speak with you tonight about eternity and the world to come and my understanding of heaven, a very small subject. And as I was trying to frame my thoughts, I remembered how I tried to explain my own sense of spirituality to my own children. I'd say to them, We're all part of a cosmic soup. A soup like chicken soup, they'd say? No, thicker, I'd reply. Like a vegetable soup? No, I'd say more like a cholent. For those of you who don't know what a cholent is, it's a Sabbath stew. Since traditionally Jews didn't light a fire on Shabbos, they'd fill a pot with carrots and beans and potatoes and beef. They would cook at a low temperature for 24 hours. And when it's done, a cholent is like something else, super thick and really yummy, and everything has melted. The boundaries between the meat and the potatoes and the carrots and the beans have all given way into this velvety, thick, savory stew. And that's been my take on eternity. That the physical world we can see is actually part of a spiritual world that's as close to us as our own breath. We're all part of a churning cosmic cholent, surrounded by souls we can't see. And that same stream of eternity runs through us, and it runs through everything around us. And as I was doing research, trying to describe the universe to my children as a giant cholent, I came upon a far more eloquent description of the universe and eternity from Einstein, who wrote these words: "A human being is part of the whole, called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separate from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. The striving to free oneself from this delusion is the one issue of true religion." Human being is part of a whole. We call it universe. We see ourselves as separate from the rest, but that's merely an optical delusion. And the role of true religion, is to free ourselves from that delusion. The teaching stopped me in my tracks when I found this teaching from Einstein, because it sounded to me like it had come from a Zen master, or perhaps from the Zohar. But it came from Einstein, who was speaking to us not as a Buddhist, and not even as a mystic, but as a physicist, convinced of the unity of all existence, who saw the interconnectedness of matter, of time and space and the universe. And of course, I found this quote on the internet, and it was divorced of all context, just as a single snippet. And it's so easy to misunderstand when you have no context. I wanted to hear Einstein's words in context. Where had he written those words? In a lecture, in an essay, in a book? I wanted to know what he was talking about. I wanted to know what had elicited these words, and I needed to know who was he talking to. And that's where my hunt began. As I dug deeper, I discovered that Einstein had written these words to a grieving father. I dug a little further and I learned that Einstein had written these words to somebody named Dr. Robert S. Marcus. I could have left it there. It's not really what I was looking at. I could have left it there, but something inside me wouldn't let it go. So I started to wonder to myself, who was this doctor? And what kind of doctor was he? And what in the world did he say to Einstein to elicit this beautiful characterization of our universe that spoke to me so deeply? I needed to know more. I spent hours and hours researching. And finally, I found out that Dr. Marcus wasn't a medical doctor. He was a rabbi. That's how they referred to clergy back then, just like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It was Rabbi Robert S. Marcus. He was the grieving father who had written to Einstein. Who was Rabbi Marcus, and What did he say to Einstein? I needed to know. I scoured the internet. I made scores of calls, interviews, archives, and soon I began to peel back the layers of this mystery. Rabbi Robert S. Marcus was an Orthodox rabbi who also earned a degree of law from NYU. But he wasn't just any old Orthodox rabbi with a law degree from NYU. Rabbi Marcus was a Jewish chaplain in the US Army during World War II. He was in General Patton's army. He was there on the beaches of Normandy, and then in southern France and in Germany. He actually led the very first Jewish prayer service in Germany. And he brought comfort and solace to frightened, wounded, and dying soldiers. He was a captain. He was awarded the Bronze Star for meritorious service. And then, on April 11th, 1945, Rabbi Marcus was one of the very first to enter Buchenwald upon its liberation. As he walked through Buchenwald, he saw the indescribable inhumanity, corpses piled high, the stench of burning flesh. And then he came upon the living corpses, human beings starved beyond all comprehension. And one by one, he told them in Yiddish, Yidden, Jews, I'm a rabbi. You are free. You are free. And as he walked deeper into this hellish world, he found children. Children. It was an unbelievable sight because, as you all know, children were the first to slaughter. But he discovered there 1,000 Jewish boys. They were malnourished, but they were alive. Amichai's father was one of them. Another one was a young boy who looked more dead than alive, named Eliezer. But we don't know him as Eliezer. We know him as Elie Wiesel. These youngsters became Rabbi Marcus's personal mission. Among them was a little boy named Lulik. Rabbi Marcus's younger colleague, Rabbi Herschel Schachter, discovered Lulik hiding in fear in a pile of corpses. And with tears streaming down his own face, he picked up this little boy and asked in Yiddish, "What's your name, my child?" "Lulik," the little boy replied. "How old are you?" the rabbi asked. "What difference does it make?" Lulik, who was 7, said. "I'm older than you anyway." "Why do you think you're older than me?" Rabbi Schachter asked, smiling. "Because you cry and laugh like a child," Lulik replied. "I haven't laughed in a long time, and I don't even cry anymore. So which one of us is older?" Little Lulik, Amichai's uncle, grew up to be Rabbi Yisrael Meir Lau, the chief Ashkenazi rabbi of Israel. Like Lulik, the people who observed these boys noticed that they looked like children, except for 2 things that stood out. First, it was their eyes. They weren't children's eyes. They were the eyes of adults who had seen far too much pain and suffering. And the other thing was, they didn't play children's games. They were drawn to the radio and to the newspaper headlines and needed to know what was going on in this world. These children would stay on for many weeks together with Rabbi Marcus in Buchenwald under his protection. It was his mission to let them be children again, to restore some measure of innocence and laughter into their lives. They were orphans with no home to return to, no parents to come home to, no arms waiting to embrace them. And he took it upon himself to become their home, their father, their mother, their rabbi, their teacher, with arms wide enough and a heart big enough to embrace them all. And of course, when he'd look upon the beautiful faces of these children, he couldn't help but long for his own children back at home. Jay, Stephen, and Tamara, who was born when he was overseas, and he missed them all so terribly. But Rabbi Marcus stayed on in Buchenwald, committed to restoring these boys to health and to finding them a new life. There were classes and religious services. He wanted to teach them to believe in a new day, to trust again, to hope again, to have faith again. He was instrumental in establishing a farm on German soil to teach young boys and girls the skills they would need to make Aliyah to Israel. It was called, of all things, Kibbutz Buchenwald. And there, they were learning to work the soil. Rabbi Marcus wrote in June of 1945, they have cows, horses, sheep, oxen, and tractors. They have learned to laugh again, to play and sing, and to dwell on things of the Spirit. And then Rabbi Marcus succeeded in arranging safe passage for hundreds of these boys, including Elie Wiesel, into France. And he insisted on personally escorting them there himself, on those same cattle trains that had brought their parents to slaughter. He was taking them to freedom. From the windows of those trains, the boys would lean out and scream at German passers-by, "Where are our parents?" And months later, Rabbi Marcus went back to Germany, and he personally escorted another set of boys and girls, the ones from Kibbutz Buchenwald. He found them safe passage on a ship to Israel, and he insisted on personally escorting them there himself. One of those passengers was a young teenage girl named Dr. Ruth Westheimer. They arrived in Haifa on Rosh Hashanah, and Rabbi Marcus led Rosh Hashanah services beneath the clear Mediterranean skies, and he said, "Never in my life did it feel so good to be a Jew." And when he finally returned back to the US, Rabbi Marcus deserved a vacation. He was reunited with his family. But trust me, he didn't go on vacation. He assumed the position as Stephen S. Wise's right-hand man as political director of the World Jewish Congress, where he fought tirelessly to help survivors remake their lives. And the issues that kept him up at night were the same issues that are alive today as they were in his own time. The rights of stateless peoples and the rights of refugees. Know when we think of those issues today that Rabbi Marcus was fighting for them back in 1945. And it was when he was in Europe lobbying for better protection for Jews there that his wife Faye and their 3 children were in a bungalow colony vacationing. And his son Jay, whom he loved more than life itself, contracted polio and died. And in his grief, Rabbi Marcus wrote a letter to Albert Einstein, and Einstein wrote him back with his beautiful description of our universe. This was the man who wrote to Einstein, not some footnote in history. It was this great man who had dedicated his life to the cause of justice and to human dignity, who had protected and cared for so many children, but who could not save his own precious son. 11 short months after receiving his response from Einstein about the unity of all things, Rabbi Robert Marcus died of a heart attack on January 18th, 1951. He was all of 41 years old. And he left behind a wife who was 35, bereft of her husband, bereft of her eldest child, with 2 small children to raise. I'd learned many remarkable things about this exceptional man. And I thought I could put the story down and focus on Einstein, but I wasn't done. I wasn't done with Rabbi Marcus. I needed to learn more about him. I needed to know what it was that Rabbi Marcus wrote to Einstein. I needed to understand what he was thinking and feeling. He must have written a pretty powerful letter if he got Einstein to write back such a poignant description of our place in the world. I'm assuming Einstein was a pretty busy guy. Rabbi Marcus was a spiritual leader in a spiritual crisis. And he didn't write to his rabbi. His Rosh Yeshiva was Rav Soloveitchik, one of the greatest Talmudic minds of the 20th century. He turns to the greatest scientific mind of his age. Perhaps after everything his eyes had seen, all the death he'd witnessed, only the assurance of a scientist could bring him comfort. The mission of Einstein's true religion is to strive to free us from the optical delusion of our consciousness that we are separate, when in truth we are one. And never before in human history do we need this message more. To believe it, to know that we belong to each other. Einstein's saying that we're all part of a great whole, all things, the living, and yes, even the dead. And it's our delusion of separateness that causes us so much pain, when in reality all is connected and intertwined. And to take it a tiny bit deeper, Einstein wrote a letter of condolence to his lifelong best friend's family. His lifelong best friend was a physicist named Michel Besso, and when Michel died, Einstein wrote this note to his family. He said, "The distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion." Einstein wrote those words less than a month before his own death. If that's the mission of true religion, I would love to be a rabbi in that religion. And I would love to speak to you about a oneness that holds us all together. Every once in a while, you catch a glimpse of it, not just on Halloween. A sense that you're part of something infinite and wondrous that not only surrounds you, but flows through you. The Torah tells us that at Sinai, when heaven and earth kissed, the people started seeing sounds. Ro'im et hakolot. They started to sense things we normally can't access. But it doesn't mean they're not here. There are frequencies of sound we can't hear, but they're real. There are particles too small for our eyes to see, but they affect us still. The physical world and the spiritual world are often described as differentiated in space. As we just prayed on Yom Kippur, we said these words on Kol Nidre, B'yeshiva shamala, u'b'yeshiva shamata. There's an upper court in heaven above and a lower court in earth below. Or sometimes we could think of Jacob's ladder, which seems to depict a physical distance between realms of holiness with angels descending and ascending. But in truth, my belief is they're not separated by distances, but merely by states of consciousness and perception. Heaven is closer than you think. It's inside you, and it's all around you. Which is what we proclaim every single time we pray the Shema. All is one. We are part of a cosmic cholent, and it is near, and it is far, and it was, and it is, and it will be. and time collapses in on itself, and we're held together in a great oneness with all the living and all the dead, and all the souls we've ever loved and who have ever loved us. For 3 years, I tried to interview Elie Wiesel because I believed that he had much to teach me about Rabbi Marcus. And believe me, I tried. I pulled every string I knew to pull. I asked everybody I know, and no matter what and who put in a good word for me, I would always get the same response: his schedule's busy, his schedule's busy. But please try again. For 3 years I tried. And then I got a response. Elie wants to talk to you. I don't know, should I talk to you about that or should we talk here? Talk about it? All right, I'll finish with that and then we'll talk. Then we'll talk here, okay? But first I want to say that I had the honor of interviewing Rabbi Naomi Levy's father, Naftali, in Israel. It was truly an honor. I waited and I reached out for 3 years. And then one day I got a response. Elie wanted to speak with me. On the afternoon of our interview, I was so excited, my heart was pounding in my chest. But colleagues of mine had told me that it's possible Elie's mind is not as clear as it used to be, and perhaps that's why he hasn't been meeting with you and why it's been so difficult for you to get to him. Maybe he doesn't remember who Rabbi Marcus was. So I still worried that Elie might not have much to tell me about Rabbi Marcus, but I was so grateful and honored to be able to speak with him. And then I asked my first question. Elie, do you remember Rabbi Robert Marcus? Elie said, do I remember? I saw a soldier appear with a Magen David sewn onto his military uniform. Elie said, this meant a lot. Up to that moment, for us, a Magen David sewed on your clothing was a mark of death. And here suddenly, it was a mark of freedom. That's not something you forget. And then Elie told me about the power of that moment when Rabbi Marcus led the very first prayer service in Buchenwald. He said to me, we prayed all the time in Buchenwald, but this was different. It was a great happiness, surprising. It meant a great deal that we could pray with him. Elie told me that he was in awe of Rabbi Marcus. He said, Naomi, the distance from us boys to Rabbi Marcus was like the distance from the earth to the sun. 70 years had passed, but his memories of that time had not faded. Toward the ending of our conversation, I asked Elie the question I'd been longing to ask him, if he knew anything about a letter Rabbi Marcus had written to Einstein after the death of his son Jay. Elie told me he did not. I read Elie Einstein's letter to Rabbi Marcus, and then I asked him, what was the most important thing that got you through your worst times? Without missing a beat, Elie replied, friendship. Without a doubt. Friendship. Yes, friendship, of course. As Elie spoke, I was beginning to see threads of connection. The way you can even be a friend to a total stranger. How Rabbi Marcus was there for Elie Wiesel, and how Einstein was there for Rabbi Marcus. Strangers who reached beyond themselves to lift up and save another. People who rose above that optical delusion of separateness. We're all part of a whole. And you never know how a stranger's going to enter your life and save you and lift you and liberate you from the delusion that you're alone. At that moment, I was just about to say thank you and hang up. But then I realized that I owed Elie Wiesel my gratitude. Not for agreeing to do this interview, but for an act of kindness he'd bestowed upon me many years ago without even knowing it. I needed to thank him, and I might never have another chance. So before I hung up with Elie, I hesitated, but then I gathered up my courage because I just knew I had to tell him how he'd saved my life. So I told Elie, I said, I need to tell you something. I assume you must hear this from so many people, how you've helped them, but I need to tell you what you did for me in my life. You cannot imagine how touched I am right now. Elie said, tell me, what happened? And so I began. I told him, I grew up in Brooklyn. My father taught me from the time I was a small child. He began teaching me Torah and commentaries and how to daven too. He'd take me with him to shul every Shabbos, and I would sit beside him and play with the strands of his talis. I told Elie about my father's murder when I was 15, and that I was a very angry kid, so angry and lost and sad. I said I didn't have a plan for ending my life, but I didn't have any plan for living either. I was only 15 years old, and I felt like I'd come to the end of things. My father was gone. My mother wasn't the same woman anymore. Shabbat, that wasn't the same. I wasn't the same. Prayer? How could prayer be the same? And what good was God anyway? I said, at that lowest point in my life, my mother saw that you were giving a lecture, and she asked me to go with her. I didn't want to go, but she encouraged me, and I went. It was a freezing cold December night, and we took the subway from Borough Park all the way up to the 92nd Street Y. And I said to Elie, I walked into this massive auditorium full of old people, and I so didn't want to be there. We were sitting in the second to the last row, and I so regretted that I'd agreed to come to this thing. But all of a sudden, the lights went down, and you walked on stage and sat down at a desk with just a spotlight on you and began speaking. At first, I was daydreaming as you spoke, but then your words began to seep into my well-defended heart. Yes, your words were sinking in. The kindness of your voice. And your hands were performing some sort of ballet in the dark. It was as if your hands were doing a performance to the words you spoke all on their own. I remember being transfixed by your hands and realizing it was the first time I'd experienced beauty since the day my father died. I was mesmerized, watching and listening to you, a man who'd been to hell and back, and seeing you offer beauty to the world gave me some sort of spark of hope. And somehow, that night, you opened a door for me to step through. That night was the beginning, a first step in many steps that would lead me back, bit by bit, out of the depths that had threatened to overtake me. Many years have passed, and I've had many causes for joy, and I just want to thank you for teaching me that there was hope in my future, and that I would have cause to celebrate and to live to give thanks. I said to Elie, a man stands in front of an auditorium of 2,000 people, and he has no idea that he's opened a new door for some lost 15-year-old kid who's listening and taking it all in. Elie said to me, you cannot imagine how touched I am. Sadly, Elie Wiesel died not long after our intimate conversation. I will treasure the precious wisdom he shared with me always, and the final words we spoke to each other. He said to me, Naomi, you found your way. You are a blessing, I replied. So are you, he said. Don't you forget that. Believe in that. More and more blessings. More and more blessings to you, Elie, in this world and beyond. And more blessings to all of you. May you see connections, and may you seek connections, the sacred threads that unite us all. Amen. And I just want to thank the daughters of Rabbi Marcus, Tamara Green, Dr. Tamara Green, and Roberta Leiner, and their families who are here tonight and who opened their homes to me, their hearts to me, and their precious legacy. God bless you.
Thank you so much. What a treat to hear you speak and bring everything to life in such a magnificent way. So I have a lot of stuff to talk about.
Me too.
I'm struck by how many people come to you for help.
Uh-huh.
And what it means for people to be seeking answers and guidance and a desire for clarity about how to live. And of course, in your story, people are turning to Rabbi Marcus, and Rabbi Marcus is turning to Einstein. And in many ways, you're turning to Einstein, and many people are turning to you. So I'm very struck by the parallels and by the deep empathy that you have for Rabbi Marcus in the anguish that he lived with, both, I imagine, for everything that he witnessed in the Holocaust, in the aftermath, and in his own personal life. And so I have a lot of respect for the way that the tragedy in your life and the tragedy in this world plays a central role in that seeking. And it's one of the things that I really value about your voice, that you don't underestimate the importance of taking seriously the suffering that people encounter. And then this question of help. And what makes people turn to you as a rabbi for help, especially in a time when so many people are becoming less affiliated, less confident that organized religion has something to offer? And yet your book is full of people who are seeking guidance and have this notion that you as a rabbi can help them find their way.
You know, it's interesting. I was only 26 years old when a congregation approached me and wanted me to interview for a position. I guess that's not really kosher, but that's actually what happened. It's not supposed to go that way.
We won't tell anyone.
No, it's just live streaming.
It's very intimate on live stream.
But I remember in the search committee, an older man said to me, "You're 26 years old. How are you going to help somebody like me?" And it's funny, there were a lot of things that I doubted at 26. Mostly, I had terrible stage fright. But there was one thing I didn't doubt, was that I would have the ability to understand people's hearts and souls. I knew that. And I felt that in many ways I'd already had a crash course in that. But I think that something that I write in the book, that people will often come to me or come to the rabbi with what they think is a life question. But I've come to see over my years in the rabbinate that, can you see me okay? That so many things that we think are life questions are actually questions of soul. And that part of the journey of this book is really to address the piece within us that I believe actually can teach us to see what Einstein was asking us to notice. That there's a soul within us. The rabbis say that the soul can actually see from one end of the universe to the other. There are so many voices that shout at us in life, voices from the outside pulling us in a million directions, and there are voices from the inside that are screaming at us. The ego's vanities, the body's hungers and desires, but the soul speaks in whispers. But it's there, and it's there to guide us. And I realize that so often when people lose direction or are confused and not knowing which way to turn, that what they really need to do is to quiet down and to listen, because there's a voice within that knows the answer. And just this past Shabbos, a young woman came to me asking me, a man had proposed to her, and she asked me, what should I do? Is this the right one? What should I do? And I said, listen, you can poll everybody around you and ask everybody around you if this is the right one. Or you can take the time to listen to your own soul to see if this one is your soulmate. And I said, you don't want to have to blame your rabbi or your best friend or your mother for a decision you made. It will be much better if you listen to yourself. And she said, how will I know? And I said, trust me on this. You'll know when you'll know.
Thank you. So I'm thinking about answers, what it means for people to want answers. And I used to work in a hospital, and there were different kinds of answers that people sought. And often they wanted concrete answers. So I'm thinking about the way that turning to a person of science implies a desire for a certain kind of certainty. And turning to a person of faith maybe once offered a certain kind of certainty that maybe we don't speak to as often these days. And I'd love for you to speak a little bit about the kinds of certainty that live in science and in the realm of faith.
Give me a second, because give me 1 second, okay?
Okay.
I'm thinking about something that I wanted to say, which is something that Einstein actually wrote. He said, the most beautiful emotion we can experience is the mysterious. It is the fundamental emotion that stands at the cradle of all true art and science. He to whom this emotion is a stranger, who can no longer wonder and stand wrapped in awe, is as good as dead, a snuffed out candle. To sense that behind anything that can be experienced, there is something that our minds cannot grasp, whose beauty and sublimity reaches us only indirectly. This is religiousness. In this sense, and in this sense only, I am a devoutly religious man. I don't know. I don't know what facts mean or what certainty means, I just was last night in Dayton, Ohio, and somebody raised his hand and asked that question. He actually said he was listening to Elie Wiesel speak in Dayton, Ohio, 30 years ago. And somebody had asked Elie Wiesel about people who have certainty. And Elie Wiesel said, if somebody tells you they know something as a fact, run. And he said it always stuck with him. And I do feel that somebody who thinks that they know the answer for sure, that they hold truth, is an imposter.
So I'm with you, and I'm also aware that there are pulls towards certainty in our society today that separate us, that make it harder for us to find middle ground in uncertainty, and that the ways that we talk to one another often presume certainty in a way that silences.
Yes. 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 I mean, that's what creates polarity. That's what creates labeling. That's what creates so many of the problems we live with in our world, is that sense that either we own God, we own the truth about God, we own the truth about so many things, and the ability to see a bigger truth, to see a wider lens, to love, to accept our own humility and our own smallness, and to understand what we lack and what we don't know for sure, will bring the Messiah for sure.
So I just have to ask this question because I see some of my students in the audience, which is always a great thing. And you were in the first class of women to be accepted here at JTS. It was an inspiring moment for those of us who wanted to come here, and I got to come here a couple years after you. We overlapped by a couple of years before you were ordained, which was just thrilling. And I'm wondering if in your sensibilities and in the way that you talk about what you know, what role gender plays in that?
I think, I wanted to be a rabbi from the time I was 4 years old, and everybody laughed at me, or people made fun of me, or people scolded me. I grew up in Borough Park, so trust me, I didn't know that there even was a Halloween. But from the time maybe I was in kindergarten forward, every single Purim, from the time maybe 6 years old to today, I've been dressing as a Hasidic rabbi. I have photos of me from elementary school. Every year it's the same. I tell people I have payas envy. I had to hide this longing when I was at Yeshiva Flatbush because it was blasphemy for sure. Not wanting to have payas, but the rest of it. But I think that I grew up as an outsider looking in. And when you're an outsider looking in, it gives you a vantage point. I mean, our people have been outsiders looking in throughout our history. And it gives you a certain kind of vantage point. And I think that being an outsider looking in gave me a certain kind of insight into maybe a different kind of Jewishness than my male counterparts were living, because they took it for granted that this was theirs. And I don't think, nothing about it did I take for granted. Nothing about it did I take for granted.
Thank you. So there are some chapters that are just...
And honestly, to this day, I know we talk about women of the wall. I would so love to go in my Hasidic costume to the men's side of that wall, because I just want to know what it's like. I just want to know what it's like to just be part of the pack, of that pack. But, I don't want to...
I'm not sure that scenario would do it.
I think so.
Yeah? You in drag?
You have to see me. I'm pretty good.
Okay.
I cut a really handsome figure as a man.
So there are some chapters in the book that are just so gorgeous, and my particular favorites made me cry a lot. Just so beautiful. And I want to talk about one of them, about Judith, the woman who ran the orphanage for the Buchenwald boys. And one of those boys was Amichai's father. And
Judith is actually Amichai's cousin.
So Amichai is very dear to me. It's really beautiful having you here tonight. So with your permission, I can ask a question. Is that okay? Okay. So just the reality of what it was to go from being in the camp to moving into life again. The way that you depicted it, I had never read anything like that. The intimacy of the decisions about which boys would room with which boys, and the total chaos of coming back into a free life, how hard it was to figure out how to live again. Really, so deeply moving and disturbing in the ways in which life was impossible and needed to be reclaimed step by step.
And that these boys were deemed psychopaths, irredeemable, damaged beyond repair. Damaged beyond repair. That's how the clinicians who dealt with these boys felt about them, that they were damaged beyond repair.
So one of the things that I found so powerful in that chapter was Judith's description of herself as the right man for the job.
I love that.
And I was wondering if you could talk about what you understand about what it takes for us to see ourselves as the right person for the job.
Well,
in a time when there's a lot of complexity.
Yes, I think what's so beautiful about what Judith said was, in a time of uncertainty, in a time of complexity, I mean, we're talking about a young woman who couldn't eat. She had no appetite. She was plagued with insomnia. She couldn't sleep. But when something comes to you and you know it, it suddenly becomes simple. So life is very complex. But if you give your soul a chance to help you, you will know what you need to do and do it. And I love when she said, I said, Judith, weren't you scared? I mean, there's all these boys, they've been labeled as derelicts, psychopaths. All of these professionals can't help them. They don't even know how to handle them. People twice her age don't know how to handle them. They're thieves. They steal food. They beat up each other. There was another thing that's not mentioned in the book, and that really rarely gets mentioned, but one of the survivors talked to me about it, which never gets talked about, is these are boys going through puberty, or delayed puberty, because when they were malnourished, they weren't going through puberty, but they're going through puberty. Weren't you frightened? And she said, I was sure of myself. I was sure of myself. I knew I was the right man for the job. So I believe in that. I believe when the stars align in such a way that you're presented with something that you're uniquely capable of doing, You rise to it with assuredness.
I think a lot of us wrestle with how to get there.
Yeah. Tell me about it.
Yeah. So,
I mean, it's a lot of what the book is about, is how do you get there? So a lot of what I write about in the book is what prayer really can do for us, or what does it mean to give your voice, your soul, a voice to speak to you? What can meditation do for you? What are the things that you can put yourself in your life in a state of being that will help raise the volume of the soul's voice in your life so that you can actually hear where it's trying to lead you and what's trying to say to you? And one of them is as simple as being in nature. Not such a simple thing in New York, but taking the time to be in nature and how it can heal you. And I tell a very, one of my favorite Hasidic stories is just about this little boy who keeps going to the woods. And the father notices his kid keeps going out into the woods. He says, "What are you doing? Why do you keep going to the woods?" And the little boy says, "Papa, I'm going there to find God." And the father generally is trying to educate his son to correct him. And the father says, "My son, don't you know God's the same everywhere?" And the little boy turns to his dad and says, "Yes, Papa, but I'm not the same everywhere." We're not the same everywhere. And we have to give ourselves opportunities, put ourselves in positions where we can actually be present, be whole, and be healed, be aware. It's not simple.
yeah, so I want to go to another chapter. Is that okay?
Yeah, go right ahead.
I want to go to another chapter that's not simple, which is the chapter about forgiveness. It's really another beautifully explored, heartbreaking story of a woman who accidentally kills somebody with her car when she reaches for her cell phone, which has fallen in the front seat, and living with herself. And I was particularly taken with this because the Center for Pastoral Education launched a program in prison and reentry ministry. And one of the students who was part of that program is here tonight. And there are a lot of people who have been found guilty of crimes and have found themselves guilty of crimes, whether they've been, whether they've served time and been indicted or not. And I really appreciated that was part of your book, that as you were dealing with forgiveness, you were dealing with a scenario where there's a life that was lost in the process, and you didn't shy away from looking at what it means to live with that guilt and to find a way to come into greater wholeness and repair, even carrying the burden of knowing that somebody died because of you. So I'm wondering if you can engage that a little bit, and how it was that you chose to talk about forgiveness through her story and not avoid the reality of that enormous burden that she lives with, and bringing that to your public.
She's a remarkable person. And I didn't know how her story would come full circle the way it did at the time. She had reached for her cell phone and she hit a pedestrian, and he died. And she came to me as a dear friend saying it was like the bottom dropped out of her life. It was just a happy, well-adjusted woman, mother, wife, and she had taken somebody's life. And we talked about how could she achieve forgiveness? What does it mean to achieve forgiveness from his family who wouldn't talk to her? How does she learn to forgive herself? Can she, in any way, find forgiveness from God? And how do you ask forgiveness? Can you receive forgiveness from the man whose life she's taken? And her story really is, her story is a breathtaking story about what she went through, how she learned to forgive herself, how she learned to pray. She said to me, all these years I thought I was praying. I was coming to shul, I was saying words, but now I see that every prayer was written for me. And I never knew that before. And then I taught her about Maimonides' laws of repentance and how she could actually go to the grave of the man whose life she had taken to beg forgiveness from him. And then, after 3.5 years of asking, she was able to come together with this man's son and his widow. And she thought that there would be no forgiveness, but at least she'd have a chance to say the words, I'm sorry. But this wife, this widow, said to her, I've come with a lot of pages here, and they're not very pretty. So I'm going to put them away. And she folded them up and put them in her purse. And then she said, let's talk. And there was a forgiveness. And there was a shehechianu. And 3.5 years after her husband died, after this embrace, when she said to my friend, God bless you, she turned to her rabbi and said, I'm ready now. I'm ready now to place a tombstone. She'd not been able to put the tombstone on her husband's grave. And forgiveness was the miracle. It was the blessing that made that all possible.
I could keep talking to you, but I think there are probably some people out there who would like to talk to you too. It's been such an honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, I want to invite questions from the audience. We have a microphone over there. Please be sure to speak into the microphone so that our live streaming folks can hear. And if we can take questions from live stream, they'll also come up to the microphone via proxy. There's a microphone over here if I can get you to speak your question so everybody can hear. So, if we can keep the questions brief, we'll have time for more people.
We'll keep it short.
Is that microphone on?
Thank
you, Larry.
you. Okay, your question?
Yeah, if Einstein's teaching was that we're all one, one is all and all is one, and we're all part of a invisible tapestry, does that include the Palestinians?
Yes.
Right, so how do you include the Palestinians? How does Netanyahu learn to include?
It's part of what the word hope means. If somebody would say to Jews being liberated in 1945 that Germany is going to be the voice of conscience of Europe, they wouldn't have believed it. I was just in Japan in June, in Hiroshima, celebrating my husband's birthday, basically at ground zero. If somebody would say to us in 1945 that the Japanese and the Americans would be great trading partners, we wouldn't believe it. We wouldn't believe it. Life is crazy. And peace, we have to believe that peace is possible. And I believe it. Okay, next question.
You come down here to the mic, that'd be great. Hello.
Hi.
A lot of myself, my friends, a lot of people, as we all know, are maybe leaving Judaism or looking towards yoga, Buddhism, other more spiritual things. Because a lot of times, at least maybe what I was learned or taught when I was a kid is, Judaism, do this, don't do that, you can't eat this, don't use your phone on Shabbat, etc. And now I find that there's more talk about universe and soul and all these things in Judaism now. And maybe I didn't pay attention as much when I was a kid, or do you find that things are changing and we're talking about stuff that maybe was always there, but maybe was or wasn't, or just wasn't focused on? And I'd love to hear your opinion on that.
Thank you. What's your name?
Irene.
Thanks, Irene. Well, the rabbis spent a lot of time talking about these issues. And obviously, Jewish mystics spent a lot of time thinking about these issues, and Hasidism spent a lot of time dealing with these issues, but a lot of it was suppressed or rejected in favor of types of learning that were more head-oriented and maybe more behavioristic. And I think that there certainly are a lot of Jews who've been raised thinking that Judaism was about what you ought to do and what you can't do. I mean, I certainly remember that. I remember going to Orthodox summer camp and being told that we had to pre-cut the toilet paper before Shabbos, and it just didn't seem to me that that's what Shabbos was about. It just didn't seem that that really was the crux of things. But we spent a lot of time doing the pre-cutting of the toilet paper. I think that it's always been something that's mattered deeply to me. And I think that the recovering strands of our own wisdom and sharing it is a very powerful thing that's happening in our time. And maybe we can thank some of the Jews who walked away from Judaism, who raised these issues. It was so interesting that, I don't know if you know who Ram Dass is, but he's sort of like the grandfather of Buddhism in America. But he read my book, and he told me that it was speaking to him of his Jewishness, And I think that certainly it's got to be our job, our mission, and our calling to share Jewish wisdom, Jewish mystical thinking, and Jewish understandings of the soul and of what the word echad really means, not just to our own people, but to the world. And I think more and more, it's happening. It's happening. And that's exciting. Okay, last question.
Over here at the mic. All right, we can take two, and that'll be it.
Thank you so much for what you've been saying. You speak of Einstein, and I think many of the physicists who are working today in quantum physics and so on are Jewish. I try to understand what's happening in science now, and I'm wondering about, because it feels to me as if it's immensely spiritual when we start looking at science today. And I'm wondering if there are other ways that you integrate science into your teaching. The particularities of Einstein and that experience are fabulous, but are you looking at that holistic vision in any other way?
It was very interesting. Honestly, I know so little about science. My sister and my brother are both doctors. I'm the rabbi. But I interviewed a brilliant physicist named Kip Thorne, who's at Caltech.
Right.
And I interviewed him, and he's in this book. And I asked him, Kip, can you explain to me what Einstein's letter means to you? And he said to me, Naomi, you see yourself as a separate entity, as a distinct entity. But trust me, there isn't a single cell in your body that's the same as it was on the day you were born. Everything is constantly being renewed and recycled and gets returned to the cosmos.
Mm-hmm.
Kip just won the Nobel Prize 2 weeks ago. Is that amazing or what?
Yes.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our last question.
I'm Moshe. Mic works there. Okay. I'm also from Brooklyn. I've noticed you say the world is pretty much is, and there's before and after, everything is like one giant chunk, like you mentioned. I heard the mention of God only once. What's God's role in all? I mean, everything. Understanding is everything is, but what? And I've noticed you did dozens of interviews and researches and studies, and clearly know how to deal with grief. What's God's role from? And if you be on your, you know that there's belief. Where does God come in play?
I love that you asked that. What's your name?
Moshe Aziz.
Moshe. Oh, Moshe Aziz, you're my friend. You're my buddy.
Yes.
See, the world is one, because if you don't think I know you well.
Huge fan.
Say it again.
I'm a huge fan. I just want to know.
So Moshe Aziz, we are Instagram buddies. Moshe Aziz, I like that you asked that question because usually people complain to me in the other direction. And they usually say to me, you throw that word God around so much, I don't even know what it means, and you're scaring people away with the word God. But I said, and I say to my colleagues all the time, I say, if I had a television channel, it would be all God all the time. I have no problem using the word God. And what I talk about in the book is that God has planted this incredible thing inside of us. And I talk about how the rabbis call the soul, like, basically, if you like Austin Powers, God's mini-me. As God can see but is not seen, the soul can see but is not seen. As God is one in the world, the soul is one in the body. As God bears the world, the soul bears the body. As God is holy and pure, the soul is holy and pure. And that God has lit this thing inside of us, and that it's our mission to hear the call because it's basically God's way of talking to us in this world. So I want to thank you for asking the question, and I promise you God's a very big part of my call and a very big part of the book. God, 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 God.
No, I'm not arguing on that fact. It's just, it's more of like you speak about the universe in large,
Yes.
as opposed to like mentioning that just like one. Like you have to believe everything is a greater good. Otherwise, how could you agree? If you say everything is just is and life and death are connected, which are but wouldn't it make sense to be a higher cause for like a deeper reason behind why whatever happened?
Yes. Actually, this is kind of interesting, and it's not really part of my book. But Einstein was a student of Spinoza's, and Einstein was actually a pure determinist, not just as a scientist, but he also believed that everything we do, just me dropping this tissue here, he believed everything was predetermined, which is kind of an interesting thing. And he believed that there was a designer who designed everything and everything that would ever happen. I'm not sure I don't believe that.
You don't believe so much in free will?
I believe in free will. And, but I thank you for asking your question. And I thank you for asking me your questions. And I thank all of you for coming here tonight. And it's really my joy and honor.
I want to thank Rabbi Levy for being with us, for your thoughtfulness, for the way in which you inspire me, and I imagine so many of us. Thank you for being here, and thank you for all of you who joined us on live stream. Rabbi Naomi Levy's book, Einstein and the Rabbi Searching for the Soul, the subject of tonight's program, will now be available for purchase and signing by Rabbi Levy in the room just to the right. And you're all invited to participate in the upcoming JTS public programming, including on November 29th, Can the Tribes of Israel Dwell Together? Thank you so much. There are some brochures outside if you want brochures about upcoming programs. Have a good night. Yes, the books are right through there.
The books.
Naomi, do you have this picture?
Very hard